Welcome, everybody. At 7 o'clock, we'll have Troy Stevens, who's going to present about a very interesting spot in Mexico. And I'll let Mary introduce Troy.
Troy Stevens is a plant grower and a collector who seems to have an attraction to the most unusual plants that I have ever seen. I met him volunteering with Kiamara Ludwig and her North American Rock Garden Society group down at Lake Merritt. And every week he brings in the weirdest plants, and they're just so wonderful. I want every one of them because they're so beautiful, but it's nature's strangest. He's a plant buyer at the Grand and manager at the Grand Lake Ace Garden Center, where we all spend a lot of time. And maybe one of the reasons that we get so many wonderful things there is because Troy is picking out all these great things for us. He's involved in a lot of societies. And as I said, he's a volunteer at Lake Merritt Garden, and he specializes in cycads, aloes, bulbs, and caudiciform plants. And last year, he had the opportunity to go to Mexico and visit the Oaxaca area. Is Oaxaca also the name of the state, or just the city?
The state, yeah.
The state as well. Okay, yeah.
Right.
And you were in the northern part of the state. Incredible biodiversity. So we are lucky tonight to see what lies just a few hundred miles to the south of us. And I can't wait to hear all about your trip rambling through the tiny towns and villages. We've had other people doing that fellow who goes to Colombia and collects papaya seed. And those are just great fun to see what people do and where they find these unusual plants. So I'd like to introduce you. Please welcome Troy Stevens.
Thank you, Mary. Yes, I took a trip. I spent 2.5 weeks in northern Oaxaca, going throughout the state. I am by no means a professional botanist or anything quite like that, but I do really enjoy plants and spend a lot of my time working with them, growing them, learning about them, and I'm in a lucky place to learn about them, and I'm surrounded by a lot of smart people. So I went with a group of 4 friends, and yeah, we spent about 2.5 weeks just driving around the northern half of the state. I like a lot of the drier side of things, a lot of the cacti, agaves. Some of my friends were more into bromeliads and tillandsias. There's palms all over the place. There's really like a bit of everything. So yeah, I'll show you what we saw. This first slide is looking over the Tehuacan Valley. Low, very arid, dry. It was still maybe about 4,000 feet of elevation. The whole trip was relatively high elevation. So you can see Oaxaca here is in the southern part of Mexico, about as far south as it gets, and as far as east almost as Chiapas, but really lends itself to having a huge biodiversity of plants. So you get warm air coming from the Gulf over here, you have cool air from the Pacific, and so a lot of things really kind of meet right in this northern half. This is just kind of a rough outline of the trip that we took. We kind of started here down in the city of Oaxaca and went kind of clockwise, go out west here to a city called Tlaxiaco, up to Tehuacan, where it's kind of dry. From through here, there's another city, Cuautla de Jimenez, which is really high elevation and cold cloud forest, foggy, lush, very lush. And then down over the mountains into Tuxtepec, which is close to Veracruz, so very hot and tropical, and then back down to Oaxaca. So this is right in the city center of the city of Oaxaca, in the old historic section. This is Cathedral Metropolitana de Nuestra Señora de la Asunción, which is Our Lady of Assumption. But this is right inside what's called the Zocalo, is the city town center. Pretty much every city has a huge church in the center of its town. So immediately, just like right in the city, I mean, there were plants everywhere. You can see I climbed up to look at this fern that was growing up on this brick wall. The street trees, everywhere you look, even in the city, is worth looking at. Primarily for the fern in the back called Gaga calfusi, which is like a relatively new genus that was actually named after Lady Gaga. The DNA sequencing of the genes come out to GAGA, and you can see the gametophyte actually has a similar shape to a dress that she wore. So relatively newly named species, but kind of cool to see. This was just at a restaurant. It's a large Monstera, maybe Adansonia or obliqua, but much larger than you'll ever see here in the Bay Area. And just growing outside, seemingly with no care. Perfect plant. This was on top of that same rooftop, not a native plant to Mexico, native to Madagascar, Pachypodium lameri, in the Apocynaceae family, but a plant that we also can't grow outside here. It's commonly sold as Madagascan palm, and people grow it as a house plant, but uh, rarely do you see them this large up here, so that was kind of cool. There's my water bottle for scale. So this is kind of right outside the city. We went to view ruins at the top of a mountain called Monte Alban, which was home to the Zapotec people. They predate the Aztecs, and we're kind of concerned with a lot of the similar astrology and making goods from things around them. I believe at the height of their civilization, there was 40,000 people living in the city. And this is just a city center on top of the mountain, but beautiful carvings everywhere. This is their famous ball court that's been preserved. A tree, and I believe it's the Malvaceae, Ceiba esculifolia. We grow a different Ceiba here, Ceiba speciosa, but this species actually is also hardy, but not commonly seen. Here's another non-native of Ficus spangalensis, but really large old plant with huge buttressed roots. Must have been there for some time. Our first actual native cactus is Stenocereus trelezi, kind of growing underneath the shade of Vauchelia here. Not in bloom, and it took a little bit of reading to figure out which exactly species this was. We knew, me and the group I was with, we knew a lot of the plants, but we certainly had to refer to either books or other people we know. One person who I'm sure a lot of you know, Kiamara Ludwig, I was sending her pictures the entire time, and she'd go through all her books and tell me, and a lot of them she knew, and it took a lot of afterthought work to find some names on some things, but so there it is for scale. Here's a small geophytic orchid, Dicromanthus cinnabarinus. Wasn't quite sure. It was popping up all over the ruins. I wasn't even sure it was an orchid. There was no foliage at the time of blooming, but this is one of those things that I learned after by scrolling through iNaturalist, which is a very good resource if you aren't sure what you're looking at. So this is our first day on the road outside of the city of Oaxaca. This is kind of going west. Stop in this kind of sandy wash where clearly there's some summer rains that kind of wash away, and I think this is kind of a bit of a dry riverbed. And our first agave was Agave podotorum, which is a relatively small species, pretty commonly used to make mezcal. There are large plantations of this one, but this was a wild population. Not a very big plant, only about 2 to 3 feet around. Some interesting damage that, we've hypothesized is maybe a wasp or a beetle or something like that, but not quite sure. Our first cactus was Ferrocactus latispinus, which is medium-sized ferrocactus, but really, really thick terminal spines on there. They kind of have a texture almost like a zip tie if you run your finger across them. This was a pretty young plant, maybe 4 inches wide at the most. A slightly older one. This species has a purple flower, but wasn't in bloom while we were there. Here's another species of ferrocactus at the same exact location, Ferrocactus macrodiscus. Smaller spines, denser ribs, overall much lower into the ground. And, grows, you can see, literally growing right underneath the other species. There was no apparent hybridization between the two. And I was kind of puzzled as to why. And I mean, none of my friends who I was with could really understand. And not only until I got back, I asked Brian Kimball from the Bancroft Garden, and he says it's because they flower at different times of the year. So there's just never a chance for the flowers to cross, but literally growing right on top of each other and no mixing there.
What month did you go in?
This was in August, which is like kind of their hot and wet season. On average, the temperatures were maybe 80 to 90 degrees, depending on where we were. There were some places that were a bit cooler, but it was pretty hot and lots of just like quick flashes of rain. There's like thunderstorms almost every other day. Yeah, August is very hot. we have a wild dahlia growing, Dahlia coccinea, which isn't a species I've ever seen in cultivation, but it was very sweet. We saw this kind of all throughout the trip. Really small flowers for a dahlia, but kind of charming. A little bit of pollinator interaction. So here's another agave potatorium with a sedum growing underneath of the sedum oaxacanum. A species that is grown. I've grown this in the past. It just makes a nice little ground cover. And you can kind of see underneath there's this kind of dark purple looking flower with these strappy leaves. And to my surprise, it's actually a fritillaria. I wasn't aware fritillarias grew as far south as southern Mexico. I wasn't able to find a species name, but kind of sweet. And there's the inside of the flower. Senecio precox is a caulescent aster, really big sprays of yellow flowers on it. They do get a relatively swollen base. I just thought this was a nice younger specimen. So this is in the city of Tlaxiaco, which apparently, before the pandemic had like a pretty rich tourism aspect to it, but after that, they pretty much haven't had many people going. So me and four of my friends walking around, we kind of stood out, and a lot of people were very curious as to like what we were doing there, and they were excited to see us certainly, but two of my friends are, 6'4" and really skinny and white guys, and they definitely don't look like any of the natives around the place, and kind of stood out. This guy saw me sitting on the curb eating my breakfast and kind of rode up to me on his bike and was asking me what are you doing. My Spanish is not great. I can kind of understand some. I can speak barely just enough to order at a restaurant, but I kind of got the vibe that he was asking what I'm doing, and I kind of motioned towards the mountains and said, like I'm here to study plants, like a studio de plantas. And he seemed very excited that I was from California. Oh, in most of the cities, you'll see echeverias growing on the roofs, like house leeks do, in Europe. And Echeveria gibiflora is a species that has, I think we saw 5 or 6 different forms while we were there. And you'd see it outside of the town and then inside the town, clearly not planted, just seed deposited by who knows, maybe a bird or something like that. But, growing out of basically concrete, another plant growing on somebody's balcony. And you go to a certain little city, and each one has like a different form of echeveria growing on all their roofs, which was kind of cool to see. So this is kind of right in the town center, the Zocalo of Tlaxiaco. This is a relatively small Brahia species. Brahia is a genus of palms that is primarily in Mexico. I think actually all in Mexico, but is like relatively poorly studied. I think there are something like 15 named species at the moment, but there's probably a lot more than that. I sent photos of this one to Jason DeWeese at Flora Grub. And, he thinks because there's no spines on the petal, it's probably Brahia calcarea. Like I said, it's kind of hard to say, but very sweet little palm. All the trees in the Zocalo, you can see these big blobs. Those are all tillandsias, like many different species of tillandsias, the air plants that we all know and grow. Uh, just proliferating outside, and pretty much every tree you look in, you'll find at least a couple. Here's the sun kind of going down before we leave the town. So back on the road, more agave potatorium. This was definitely a plantation. They were kind of planted in rows, but really nice markings on the backs of the leaves. You can see the imprints there and kind of twisty terminal spines. You can kind of see the vague rows that they're planted in here, and these pines have started to move back in. I think it's an abandoned plantation. It doesn't look like anybody's been there in some time. And they were just starting to flower. It's a yellow flower, hummingbird pollinated, but beautiful spikes. So this is right outside a city called Santiago Yosandua. This is a relatively popular tourist attraction. It's Cascada Esmeralda. Huge waterfall, it went on for a couple 100 feet even below this photo here, but really pretty, and it kind of overlooks this big valley to the north of it. It's a great place to look for plants. You can see the valley there. This is Oreopanic salvini in the Aurelia family of an arborescent Schefflera-like plant. You kind of see this is the road that we travel down. And primarily we're looking at the wall here for the plants. You can see just like in all these little pockets, everywhere you look, there's agaves, ferns, carnivorous plants, begonias, a lot of things that I personally never thought of growing next to each other and inhabiting the same conditions, seemingly very happy. I would assume this is like sedimentary rock, and you can see it's kind of been flipped up and inverted, but in the cracks of them, it's a vertical garden, full of amazing plants. I mean, plants that I've known and grown here, plants that I've never seen before. It was really kind of overwhelming. I stop in road cuts like this in California and hope to find one little Dudleya or something like that. And so just to see three different agaves, two different ferns, Oreopanax, all these things in once, it's a very overwhelming experience. So here are just some shots from on the wall. The photos in this slideshow are like a collection of my own, one of my friends, Max Cannon, and my other friend, David Newmeyer. I didn't bring a real camera. Most of my photos were just shot on iPhone, but they brought really nice telephoto lenses so you can kind of zoom in. Like, I mean, this was probably 40 feet up on the cliff. This was the primary agave we came to see, is agave cavendivi, a relatively small species, and as far as I know, there's only like one other locality other than here. So very restricted, certainly subject to poaching. All these plants were at least 100 feet up on the cliff, and so not really accessible. These pictures were all with the telephoto lens. You can see a kind of unusual begonia. I think it's begonia unifolia or something like that behind it. There's a plant that's bloomed and is actually starting to dichotomize and grow two heads, but you know, there's no soil here really. It's literally growing out of pure rock, purely lithophytic. So another thing I saw a lot was plants growing in places where you don't expect them. You never think of agaves being epiphytes. You don't really think of cacti as being epiphytes. But we saw almost every plant that was in the ground at some point we also saw in a tree. So this is like maybe 30 feet up a Montezuma cypress, taxodium, kind of looking down from a bridge, but you know, agaves growing in trees is not something I ever thought I'd see. Here was like the one seedling that was like close enough that you could actually look at it. I would assume most of the other seedlings that germinate on the wall just immediately get taken by people. The relatively large agave Seemaniana, growing and setting up a flower spike. Here's a cool fern, Pleopeltis angusta, which is in the Polypody family. I think it does go dormant in the dry season, so went at a good timing to see a lot of stuff actually active in growth, but you can kind of see a cool spore pattern on the backs of the leaves there, kind of hand-shaped. Here's a random Gesneria that was growing on the wall. One of my friends thought it might be a Siningia. I'm personally not too well versed in the Gesneria you see, and so I wasn't too sure. There was like a dark-leafed form of this plant there as well. Here's another bulb that I didn't realize grew as far south as Mexico. This is Calicortus barbatus. There's a few other species that have just been named recently in the past year or so in this same area, and there was some debate as to whether this was barbatus or one of these new species. It didn't have the nodding flower, so it's likely barbatus, but yeah, there's some of my favorite Californian bulbs, and so very cool surprise to see it growing underneath an agave thousands of miles away. Here's another shot. Really furry, fuzzy petals. So here's an epiphytic bromeliad, Catopsis sperderoniana, which is thought to be actually a carnivorous bromeliad. It's suggested that there are digestive enzymes deep inside the pit of the foliage there, which I think is kind of cool. I've never really thought of bromeliads as carnivorous plants, but beautiful orange flowers on these when they are in bloom. I didn't see any in bloom here. This is a plant that you can grow outside here in the Bay Area. Another plant I've actually grown outside in the Bay Area, Tillandsia butzi. I found this one kind of floating at the base of the falls and propped it back up in a tree, but very nice patterns. So further along, this is maybe 2 days later. This is a pretty high elevation. This is like closer to like 10,500 feet, in an area Santa Maria Yucuhiti. But this is another relatively newly named species, Agave rosalezi. It was thought to be a form of Agave elamitiana, which grows a few thousand miles away in Veracruz. But it's considered distinct at this point. It's gotten its own species name. This is the type locality here. Very cold and wet. This is a plant that I'm sure would do great in San Francisco. It was probably one of the coldest places we went to on the entire trip. We didn't bring jackets because we thought it was summer and hot and the wet season, but uh, we didn't spend too long here because it was actually quite chilly. We kind of grow on these big volcanic looking rock escarpments and just thousands of plants at this location. I mean, you look up and the entire mountains around you, there you can just see thousands upon thousands of plants. None in bloom. It was, I guess, the wrong time of year to see a flower. Reminiscent of Agave attenuata, of course. But no stems, they don't ever really form like a caulescent stem. They do have slight teeth on the margin. They do sometimes, like about half the population was kind of bluish gray glaucous, and half of them were kind of more of that soft appley green, and not as big as attenuata. But really, really a sight to be seen. I mean, and I can't overstate how many thousands of plants there were. We were kind of given permission to walk in through this path that kind of led to somebody's house at a certain point to get close to see these plants. And um, at one point, the lady who told us we can go back there, she suggested that we eat them. She says, like, if you eat the seedlings, it's apparently good for your stomach digestion, but we did not eat it. So you can see some of those more escarpments in the back, but all of these little spires here, just thousands upon thousands of plants, and they only grew on the rock. There were none actually like in the ground as well, which is interesting. Here's a plant that we grow in the Bay Area, Kufia cyanea. There's, I believe, a cultivar striving sunset that's pretty popular. But another plant that I've known for years and have grown and put in gardens and stuff, and so it's like a familiar old friend, which is kind of cool. I'm sure many of you have grown a very similar plant. Here we have another Oreopanax, another Aurelia ivy type thing. Just starting, but really beautiful radial symmetry on the leaves. The plant in the aster family that I, as far as I can tell, isn't in cultivation anymore. It's called Psychalium. Um, they have a white composite flower, almost like ageratum. You know, there's no real ray flowers on the outside of it. It's kind of just this composite disc of white little fuzzy flowers. But this was one that nobody knew what it was at the time of seeing it. It's only after doing research when we got back that we actually were able to find even a genus name. But some of them kind of had a pink tinge to the edge of their leaves there. Here's a relatively common carnivorous plant that a lot of people grow, Pinguicula morinensis. You'd see these growing on a lot of like rocks where there's just heavy seepage, pretty much always moist. Green forms, pink forms, flowers ranging from like this kind of more magenta violety color to more of a lighter pink. But another plant that we saw thousands of. They kind of revert to a small succulent rosette in the dry season, so it's nice to see them actually actively growing and flowering. There's a bloom. Didn't really notice too many flies actually attached to any of them, so not sure how successful they are with that, but I mean, they seem to be happy. Here's a relatively rare species of Tillandsia laui. This was the only plant we saw of this species. This is kind of going down the hill from Santa Maria. The spike on that is maybe 2 feet tall and close to like 6 inches wide. So like really, really large spike for a Tillandsia. This is a plant that it's even hard to find pictures of online. It's apparently relatively restricted. My bromeliad friends who I was with were freaking out when we saw this. There's Oxalis lasiandras all over the place. Very variable species. Some have deeper red markings with thinner leaflets, and some have these really long, narrow leaflets. It's a plant that's pretty much all over the state from what I can tell. Another plant that I've grown here, we grow it in the rock garden at Lake Merritt. If anybody ever wants some, we have a lot of it growing. There's a Tigridia, iris family, Tigridia bicolor. There were the more common kind of big, colorful, tulip-looking Tigridias, but I didn't take too many pictures of those. Those are mostly right along the highway. Another Pleopeltis mexicana. Kind of see the sori from the top of the leaf, on the bottom there. And an Elaphoglossum. Another genus that probably has over 100 species in Oaxaca, but most of them have not been named, and so who knows what this one was. This was taken from a moving car, but this is Ficus petiolaris, which is one of the common rock figs. You see them growing in pretty hot, dry areas with their roots really kind of draping down, similar to like a banyan tree, but actually a native to Mexico. I have a shot of one later in the botanic garden in the city that's really a stunning tree. It's a plant I've killed. Javeria gigantea. You can see in the background there are quite a bit of kalanchoe. I think it's Dagramontanum or the mother of millions. Definitely a pretty invasive plant throughout the place. They're mostly just kind of right outside of towns and little pueblos, but we kind of saw this all throughout the entire trip. Here's a larger specimen going into flower. And there's one you can see actually growing epiphytically on a cactus. So Echeveria, another plant that I'd never considered would be growing epiphytically anywhere. It's a relatively nice and old Mammillaria mystax, kind of reclining along the rocks here. Nice big two-headed specimen. This was maybe about a foot long and 6-7 inches wide. Must be an incredibly old plant. Here's an Echeveria relative called Thompsonella. The difference between these and the genus Echeveria is these do go dormant completely in the dry season, almost like a bulb, so they die back to a stem underneath the surface, and you only get the leaves during the active growing season. From what I've been told, they're relatively hard to grow in cultivation, so you don't really ever see them for sale. Really beautiful, kind of crinkly, crispate leaves. Here's a plant that's pretty much everywhere also is Selaginella lepidophylla. Resurrection plant, they close up into these dry brown baskets during the dry season, and then once the rain comes, they kind of emerge and grow into these big lifelike things, and they would cover entire rock walls. This was probably the largest one I saw, but really nice pattern on it. A plant that is sold a lot of the time in garden centers, but I'm pretty sure they're pretty much all wild collected, which not great. Here's another kind of barrel-like cactus. This is a kind of cactus Platycanthus. A younger specimen, when they're young, they have these really nice purple bands along the ribs that they kind of lose as they get older. This is a plant that we saw in the Tehuacan Valley, and by the millions. I mean, millions of plants. So you look out over this entire valley that must be the size of the Bay Area, if not larger. And just as far as you can see, there's these and there's columnar cacti that I'll show you later. But here's a mature plant. You can see it's kind of lost the purple, but that was about a little over waist high, really large. They can get up. I mean, I've seen pictures of them as tall as 6 or 7 feet. So one of the larger barrel cacti, yellow flowers. And you can see one here growing underneath one of our really like prominent plants that we made sure we wanted to see while we were here. This is kind of in the valley of Tehuacan near Zapatitlan Salinas. These are Fuquaria ochoterinae, Ocotillo relatives. Fuquaria splendens grows up in the Sonoran Desert. This is one of their southern relatives, but one of the larger arborescent type species. It has a deep maroon flower. It wasn't in bloom at the time, but these were the three largest and nicest specimens we found. Kind of right off the highway there. But beautiful peeling, exfoliating bark, kind of reminiscent of like a manzanita or arbutus up here. Growing on it was Tillandsia atroviridipella, which is a very slow growing species. It's there. I actually just watched a whole presentation about this group of Tillandsias by Pam Coity Hyatt, who has a nursery down in San Diego. And she went really deep into the taxonomy of the relativeness of these and this other group that grows down in, I think, coastal Peru, she was saying. But this species is relatively widespread in Oaxaca, but very slow growing. You can buy these from Tillandsia growers, but they tend to cost a lot just because they are slow. Not very tolerant of winter rain here. So here are the two dominant columnar cacti in that valley. It's Cephaloserius tedetso and Cephaloserius columna trahani. The distinguishing thing between the two is the tedetso has branches and the columna trahani is always single. Other than that, they look basically the same, but this is another plant that, as far as you can see, millions upon millions of all different ages, little seedlings, huge 30-foot tall plants. This is a very hot, dry, and arid place. It must have been 100 degrees while we are here this day. And it did rain right after. This is kind of looking through it's the Tehuacan Biosphere Preserve. So this is all protected land at this point. No mezcal farms, no sugarcane fields, nothing like that. It's all just kind of left to do what it does. It's kind of a younger plant. Tillandsia califani growing on the side of it. Relatively large. That was maybe about a foot tall. I climbed up on top of this rock to get a photo of an echeveria that was growing on the side, but it just like in this crevice alone, there was, I think, 6 different species of cacti growing. And once again, like no soil, like, purely lithophytic. There might be a little bit of leaf litter or something that gets seeped into there, but you have like a myrtillo cactus. This is 2 different species of mammillaria. This is probably the Cephaloserius, maybe another mammillaria back there, but just all fighting for moisture and light and just in one little crevice. Really kind of cool. Here's the Echeveria that I was climbing the rock to get to is Echeveria peacocki, and Tillandsia pueblensis. The Echeveria is another species that's like certainly under threat of extinction. My guide when I was there, he had been there, I think it was about 15 years ago, and he said that at this exact rock there must have been a few hundred plants, and at this point I saw these 3, and then there was maybe 3 or 4 more on the other side. Then they just happened to be right where people couldn't reach them. It was too far down from the top, and you couldn't climb up, and just out of reach. But definitely a plant that's quite threatened at this point. So this is inside the botanic garden in the Zapotitlan Salinas. So you can actually rent these little casitas and spend the night there. Relatively cheap. I mean, it was maybe $30 a night or something like that. I'll say there was a lot of bugs. It was very hot inside. There's no AC, definitely. There was a thunderstorm that night. We were kind of a little spooked out by that, but really kind of a beautiful experience to be inside the Botanic Garden at night. This is kind of as the sun goes down, looking over the valley. This is on a night hike, just a few photos we took. Cephaloserius again. Another echinocactus. This is a tarantula that I caught. It like promptly climbed up my sleeve after this photo and kind of came out the neck of my shirt. Thankfully not aggressive at all, but kind of cool. Looking over the valley, kind of deep down in these gorges here. I mean, this the guide told us that this used to be like an ancient seabed millions of years ago, and so like if you go down in all these little gorges down here, you like the entire bed of it is just like lined with fossils, like all types of little crinoids and shellfish and things, like just as far as you can look. And now this is, I think 7,000 feet elevation, somewhere near there. So the fact that it was underneath water at some point and now is so far up really just kind of blows my mind. There's agave that's growing there, agave macroacantha. Kind of a hard species to find in California that doesn't have areophoid mites on it. It seems like this species is kind of a mite magnet. And so I've tried to find them personally for a while, but I can't find any clean ones. So it was nice to see in habitat they're completely untouched by the mite, no damage seemingly. Small plants, only maybe a foot and a half around. There's another Phaerocactus robustus. Pretty distinct species as the heads never get very large and it just forms these large clusters. It offsets much more than any other Phaerocactus. There's a flower. Here's one of the larger clumps kind of looking over a cliff here. But that was maybe 6, 7 feet wide, probably a few hundred heads on the plant. One of the common, ponytail palms, they call it Bucarnia gracilis. Not a palm, much closer related to agaves, but another plant that we saw by the hundreds. Everything from little seedlings to large, big fat specimens, some were big enough that you could even climb inside of them. A really nice texture on the trunk. See, they kind of have a tortoise shell like base to them. This is kind of looking up the hill, but you can just see all the outlines of all the Cephalocereus there. They all kind of have a distinctive lean towards the sun too. They all kind of point in a certain direction. Here's probably the largest cactus we saw on the trip, Pachycereus weberi, Cardone, they call them. Really old plant. I mean, this must have been a few hundred years old. This was just right outside a small pueblo that specialized in making pottery. Just kind of looking up through the center of the plant. Here's something interesting is producing new spines on an aerial that is probably like only 2 to 3 feet off the ground. So one of the oldest aerials on the plant is like still actively producing spines each year. And when you think of like, spines being modified leaves and I kind of think of it as like a deciduous tree producing leaves annually. But just kind of crazy to think that this aerial that may have been produced a couple hundred years ago on this plant is still actively producing new spines. There's the plant, maybe 25 feet tall or so. Must weigh a ton. Everywhere you go, you get these little vignettes of things growing out of the same location. So, in this picture alone, there's Echeneria pulvinata, which is this kind of caulescent species. There's two different caliceas. There's one here, this kind of fuzzy one, and this other one, the relatives of Tradescantia. Lots of this family throughout the place. And then you have a Mammillarius fasciculata, just all occupying the same exact niche, and a Tillandsia in the back. This is Nolina parviflora, which they call like bear grass, one of the arborescent types. Some of them don't have any stems. This area was kind of interesting. It kind of reminded me of like the woods and the foothills of California. I mean, the dominant trees are oaks and there's manzanitas. There's like one species of Arctostaphylos that grows here. There's a ceanothus that grows here. But then you have just these large arborescent monocots like Nolina, which like we certainly don't really have in California. And they kind of have a very humanistic character to them. You can see all the Spanish moss growing in the background as well. It's kind of growing in the shade here. They all kind of pointed the same direction. They look like little groups of people with their big shaggy coats on. Some trunk detail. There's a really small cactus I almost stepped on, Coryphantha elephantidens. This was maybe only 2 inches wide or so, 2, 3 inches. But yeah, it's just a strange feeling like you might even be in the foothills of California, and then you have Nolinas and cacti and Tillandsias and all these little weird things growing in the same little niche. Here's the one Ceanothus ceruleus, which I think Bart told me at one point that it's the only species in Mexico. They're all Ceanothus ceruleus. Here's a geophytic orchid Goodyeara. The common name is like rattlesnake plantain. They kind of have this like rattlesnake looking inflorescence that comes up. A very widespread genus. I think they go all the way up to Canada. There's the Spanish moss or Tillandsia uzinoides. Uzinoides. This was one with like kind of a lime greenish flower. Profuse. I would assume this area gets doused in fog pretty often. It was humid, but just to have enough moisture to keep these things going, I would assume it gets pretty fog laden. Another brahia, another instance where, I'm not quite sure of what species it was, possibly calcarea, possibly dulcis, but also growing in that same forest, it's very strange to see palms growing underneath oaks. It's not something I'm used to. And exposed, this is taken from a moving car, but we drove for probably an hour straight after leaving that little forest scene, and just all you see is brahias and trunking ones, non-trunking ones, blue ones, green ones, but probably a lot of hybridization going on if these are going to be considered distinct species, but just by the thousand. I mean, it's all you see for like an hour. So here's the first cycad we saw is Dioon purpusi. This was pretty high up, maybe 8,000 feet on the road to a city called Concepcion. They were building a road that definitely went like right through this population. So I would assume a lot of the plants were lost in the construction of the road. And we stopped and talked to some of the workers who were just kind of down below this photo here and asked them like, how do we see the plants? And they kind of motion that we can kind of go up and around and we climb up to see it. And one of the guys we were talking to, he actually, I guess, lived in San Jose for a few years. And so he spoke English pretty well. And he was very surprised that we came all the way here to see this cycad. And I think the quote he said was, they're all trees to me. So it makes you kind of weary of like, when they are making these roads, a lot of plants are lost. Plants that are already threatened, already under the, threat of extinction. The roads are probably necessary for the people in the area, but it just makes you wonder what was there beforehand. Here's a very common Tillandsia ionantha. This is maybe the most common species you see for sale in garden centers in California. But just about to bloom, it's kind of putting on some color just to let the pollinators know that there's going to be available nectar here soon. Beautiful bright red. Here's another Bucarnia that grew at the top of this mountain. Very plentiful, very old plants. Here's probably the largest one in that spot. These are also, host plants to a lot of epiphytes. So like, I mean, in this picture alone, I think there's probably 5 or 6 different families of plants just growing on this one tree. You have like probably a Hylocereus or Selenocereus species, one of these kind of epiphytic climbing cacti. You've got agaves, you've got 2 or 3 different tillandsias. There's orchids on the backside. It's kind of hard to tell where the tillandsia stop and the Bucarnia actually starts, but um, host plants just for so many different plants. And I mean, you can even see a tillandsia growing on the cactus, growing on the Bucarnia. It's like this whole chain of epiphytes. Not something I'm used to seeing in California. You can see even the cacti are home to a lot of these tillandsias as well. Here's an Echeveria laui, another plant certainly under threat of extinction. We had to pay a guide to give us like an hour-long hike into this deep little valley. It must have been 100 degrees. I felt very bad for the people I was with because we were running low on water. I was really the only person who really wanted to see this plant. And so we pay the guy, we hike down. He says that, on this wall where these pictures were taken, there used to be thousands of them, but, it's the same thing where, they're only at the top of the wall now where they're out of reach. But really kind of just perfect, pristine plants. They remind me a lot of our native Dudleya, a plant that is grown in cultivation. You can buy them at the Bancroft Garden sometimes. Here's a lithophytic tillandsia, one of the largest tillandsias that I'm familiar with, Tillandsia grandis. These were maybe 3, 4 feet across. There are green forms and purple forms, but also just growing out of straight pure rock. There was a few that were like kind of at the bottom of the cliff here, just like that had clearly fallen off because they must weigh a ton when they get rained on. You just think of that whole thing filled with water. I can't imagine how they attach themselves so strongly to these rocks, but it's just testament to their evolution, I guess. None in bloom. And there you can see some of the purple formed ones. This is a wild plumeria actually growing in the back. It's a white flowered one. I didn't get the species name, but so one morning we took a hike at like 3 a.m. to come here to this canyon. This is Canyon Alice Verdes. Where you come to see specifically these birds that live here. There are these kind of vertical fissures where they nest, and as the sun comes up, you're just sitting on this rock, waiting, 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 and eventually you start hearing all these really strange noises that really kind of echo strongly through the canyon. There's nothing else making noise. And the sun comes up, and then at a certain point, they finally fly out, and it's the green military macaw. So this is like an ancient nesting site that's completely unavailable to predators and people and stuff. So they've been coming here for thousands of years to lay their eggs, and they leave after. We saw maybe 7 or 8 of them, and they'd kind of just fly around and squawk and come up to you, and then they kind of fly back. But really kind of a magical experience. I'm not the biggest birder, but some of the people I was with are really, really into birds, and this is a real bucket list bird for them. And as a person who I wouldn't consider myself a birder, I was overwhelmed by this. There's a lot of plants that grow at that same spot. Another Coryphantha pallida. Here's a plant in the Euphorbia family, Snitoscolus, which is it really just kind of an awful plant. Like these spines, they would stick you, and then you'd have a itching rash, almost like a stinging nettle. In my opinion, worse. This plant grew everywhere, and you kind of had to like walk through thickets of it. So like wearing thick clothes is definitely recommended. And it's like kind of this conundrum or whatever, because you don't want to wear thick clothes because it's 100 degrees, but you kind of have to because you don't want to get torn up by these plants. Here's a bursera. Plant in the frankincense family. They make a few different types of incense out of this, out of the resin that grows out of it. Another plant with really beautiful peeling bark, almost like a manzanita. There were probably 6 or 7 different species at this location. Here's one of the main tillandsias that our group wanted to see is Tillandsia prodigiosa. The spike on that is maybe 3 feet long. And we were a little early to see the actual flowers open. When the flowers are open, the whole spike turns bright red. It's very commonly cut and used in religious ceremonies in the area. So a lot of time you don't even see the spike when it's in flower, but you can see it's just kind of starting to color up there. It's a single-headed species. It never offsets, and so propagation is purely from seed. This is one that's bloom is kind of past its prime, so the color is faded, but you can see all the lateral branches and the old bracts still on it. So you can imagine these kind of hung up on the entryways of buildings and stuff, very ornamental. There's my hand for scale. Another Tillandsia. This is Tillandsia multicaulis, a species I have grown outside. It handles our winter rain just fine here. Most of the year it just looks like a very generic bromeliad, but they get these big red scapes that come out from the sides and purple flowers after. Another cycad Dioun califanoi. This is a pretty well-known population on the road to Cuautla de Jimenez. Really, these are the largest cycads we saw, very old plants. This cluster alone, the trunk on the left was maybe 10 feet tall into the crown there, and then, the leaves extend further past that. But, thinking that these plants maybe grow 5, 10 millimeters a year, if that's like under ideal rains, these plants must be a few hundred years old, if not 1,000. It's very hard to say. This actual clump is like a relatively famous specimen. I'm pretty sure it's been on the cover of some of the CSSA journals, and it's been 1 or 2 of my cycad books. So it's a pretty well-known specimen, this one. But this trunk here was close to 15 feet long and kind of reclining, and you can see covered in mammillaria cacti. There's tillandsias, another host plant for epiphytic plants, but it's an ancient plant, really. It's Cycads are some of my favorite plants. They kind of have this, they've been on Earth for close to 300 million years now. Cone-bearing plants, they predate all flowering plants. They have this very ancient kind of mystic feel to them. And being around one this old in habitat, it's been sitting on this hill for who knows how long, is a very cool experience. It started pouring rain immediately after we left this plant, so we just had the perfect 15-minute window to spend some time here. See the kind of dragon scale like old leaf bases there. Really nice leaflet arrangement. If you look at it from the right angle, it's like perfectly see-through. Here's a coning plant. This is a male. This population had hundreds of plants and all different ages, seedlings, older coning plants. It was like really kind of nice to see that it's not just being completely poached. These plants are very subject to poaching and reselling, and I think there are only 3 or 4 really known populations of this plant in all of Mexico. So it's good to see a population that's clearly healthy, not too at risk, even though it is relatively conspicuous here. This is a Brigmansia that they were growing in a stack of tires outside of a restaurant. Not native, but I kind of like the arrangement. This was a Stanhopea that was at a hotel that we stayed at. A wild collected plant. The lady told us she took it from up somewhere on the mountain or something like that. Really intense fragrance of like it smells like a mint Girl Scout cookie, or like toothpaste almost, and you can smell it from a few feet away. Really, really nice, but huge flowers. This is a plant that you can grow outside. There's a few different Stanhopeas that'll do fine here. And so this is kind of in the city of Huautla de Jimenez, which is just like cold, foggy cloud forest. It's wet most of the time there and foggy, and so it's a lot lusher. There's less succulents, more trees and ferns and begonias and things, philodendrons. A lot of things that I consider house plants. Like here's an Anthurium podophyllum, which is a species that I have grown. I have a few plants now. It is hardy, completely outside here, but really cool, highly dissected leaves. The leaves can get, 3 to 4 feet wide eventually at maturity. Not a plant that I expected to see at all on this trip. For some reason in my mind, the Santhurium was from like Ecuador or even further south, but really cool to see this one in habitat. There are only a few plants at this location, but the plant Psychotria pipigiana, which they call like the sore mouth plant or kiss plant or something like that. Looks kind of like a little pair of lips. The Rubiaceae coffee family. And there it is with some flowers actually open. Here's a palm that I got the location of from Brian Kimball, Chamaedorea metallica. He says you go to the certain mile marker and you walk through the sugarcane field and you go down underneath and you can find a few of the palms. This was a location that sugarcane at this point is like it's everywhere. They've clear cut a good portion of the forest to grow it. And so there was only a few plants where we found them here, like maybe 2 or 3. But another plant that is grown as a house plant. I've had these in the past, but cool to see it in the context of where it actually lives. I mean, it was deep under thicket. There's no light actually penetrate. Like this thing never sees the sun. Kind of hard to believe a plant would survive where it was at really, but really unique kind of metallic sheen, hence the name Metallica. Yeah, just a couple plants here. There's another cycad, Ceratizamia aurantiaca. Just a young seedling, kind of still showing some of the color from the new emergent leaf. Here's a bigger one that we found at this people's house. We were driving along and I see this bright flush of orange and we slam on the brakes and I hop out to go take pictures. The guys kind of further up in the picture here, they were just kind of down the hill building a house and they saw me taking pictures and were just like very curious. They're like, "Oh, you want to come in and take a look?" And incredibly friendly people. They like offered us to stay for lunch and we didn't have time to stay, unfortunately, but they were very happy to show us the plants they had collected from the area around them. You can see my friend Bill here is holding like a big bag of fruit that they gave us from this tree that they were growing. And Uh, Everywhere we went, people were just incredibly welcoming and just wanted to share their culture with us. Oaxaca as a whole, like everywhere we went, I can't explain how friendly the people were. Very welcoming. There's the leaf, still pretty rubbery. And here's a male cone. You can see the name Ceratozamia means spiny zamia. It distinguishes them from the other genus Zamia because they have prickles on the petioles there. Random little mushroom. Here's some live sphagnum, which is something we all use, I'm sure, in our growth mediums, but cool to see it actually growing in habitat. Here's a large fern, Pteris podophylla. There's a popular book called Oaxaca Journal by this, I think it was a neuroscientist, Oliver Sacks, but he went to Oaxaca, I think in the early 2000s on a fern tour with the Fern Society. And this was like one of the plants they spent a long time. And there's this whole excerpt in the book about trying to find this and how they very narrowly happened to see it. And we just kind of also stumbled upon it, probably in a similar location. It's hard to get scale from this photo, but that emergent frond there is maybe 3.5 feet wide and at maturity, and it'll be closer to 4.5 feet. Really large. Here's a fern, Odontosauria. There's a couple other species of Odontosauria in the area, but this one didn't match the description of any of them. But really kind of lacy imbricate foliage, like a maidenhair almost. There's an adiantum species that I was not able to identify. A Vitaria. A really nice sori pattern. Kind of blurry photo, but this is a vine in the milkweed family, Matelia velutina. The flower kind of reminded me of like some of those like moth orchids, Phalaenopsis, with the kind of similar shape, but really reticulate venation pattern on it. Took me a while to find the actual name on this one, but yeah, milkweed family. There's a Begonia timii. So many begonias. They're incredibly variable. It's really hard to get a name on a lot of these species. Have an interesting kind of cut leaf one. It's a really teeny one, and you can see right underneath it is a plant we know as Tradescantia zebrina, like a classic old time house plant. Another thing that I've always kind of personally written off, I don't really like it, but seeing it growing in the context of its actual habitat was really kind of a humbling experience, and so I've kind of grown on this plant a little bit. Very large caterpillar. You can see the bristles almost kind of resemble the Lycopodium club fern that's growing behind it there. Maybe camouflaging it. So one of the dominant trees in the area is Platanus mexicana, the Mexican sycamore. These were huge. I mean, maybe 80 feet tall, some of them, and and especially in the rain, they had just the most beautiful patterns on their bark. A pretty large, kind of gnarly specimen. Another tree that I never thought I'd have much interest in, sycamores, but really beautiful plant. I actually had just recently ordered seeds of this to grow some. Another tree in the same area, Cecropia obtusifolia. I think those are their Urticaceae, which is like the nettle family. Kind of reminiscent of like a Schefflera or Oreopanix or something. The kind of big radial leaves, huge leaves. Eventually they branch and become kind of an upper canopy plant. They cast a really cool shadow on the ground underneath. So this is kind of towards the end of the trip on the way back to the city of Oaxaca. This is like the one plant nursery that we stopped at. They specialize in bromeliads and tillandsias, but they grow a whole host of other things. It was, as somebody who works in a nursery, it's kind of interesting to see nurseries from a whole different part of the world and just how they run their business. We kind of walked in, there was nobody there really. Eventually, this lady comes out, just tells us look around if we have any questions or whatever. But lots of calla lilies, lots of non-native things. And then lots of tillandsias, which I can only assume were wild collected. It didn't really seem like they were growing anything from seed there. Here's the catopsis from earlier in the trip. Here's a tree right outside of the nursery, which I can assume they get a lot of their stock from, because the trees everywhere that you look in these trees are just loaded with tillandsias. There's probably 3 or 4 different species in this picture, but you can see the prodigiosa in bloom in a few spots. So this is right outside of Oaxaca in the city of Mitla, or no, not Mitla, excuse me. Um, Tule, the city of Tule. This is Tule de Arbol, which is like the considered the widest tree in the world. It's a Montezuma cypress. They typically grow on the edges of rivers, but there is no river here, so it's thought that this tree found some kind of underground spring. But it's, estimated to be 2 to 3 thousand years old, considered the widest circumference tree in the world. You kind of have to pay for a ticket to get in, to get close to it like this. It's all fenced off. Obviously, you can't get too close to the tree. But as somebody who likes trees, it's definitely kind of a bucket list. I mean, I've known of this tree for many years, so it was very cool to actually see it in person. Here's a carnivorous plant or excuse me, not carnivorous, parasitic plant in the mistletoe family, Psittacanthus, that is pretty much everywhere throughout the state of Oaxaca. Driving on the highways, you just see these large sprays of orange in all the trees and like bright, bright orange. And we didn't really even see it up close until the last day, but really kind of ornate little twisty flowers on it. Here's another form of Echeveria gilliflora in the city of Mitla. More of just a purple, big solitary rosette plant. These were planted, but it's another thing where it's like it grows right outside the city, and once you get in the city, you see the same plant everywhere. Here it is growing on a rooftop in bloom, or past bloom, dried spikes. So this is just back in the city of Oaxaca at the Botanic Garden, Big Bucarnia. The Botanic Garden is kind of geared towards ethnobotany and the uses of the plants, and so there's no labels on any of the plants. It's kind of hard to get names on any of them. The guide was much more interested in telling me about the different corns and rices that they grew, as opposed to the different trees and cacti and things. But really, a beautiful botanic garden. You have to go on the tour there. You can't just like buy a ticket and walk around. You have to go on this tour, and they give you little breaks in between. And so I'd break away to go see the other plants around. They have attendants that like very closely watch you and make sure you're not touching the plants and things like that. So a very different botanic garden experience than I'm used to, but clearly very historic. There's a Fuquaria purpusi, another Ocotillo relative. This is a plant that we tried to see. I had location data on it, but at 3 different locations, I was never able to find a single one. It was a much larger, older one. I'm sure this is a Nolina. There's that ficus again, Ficus petiolaris, the rock fig, kind of coming over this brick wall. There's a Dioon, probably Califanoian cone. This is a female, much larger cones than the males, as big as your head. Another Bucarnia with some agave, I believe stricta underneath it, and agave guiangola to the left. And another plant that grows in the area is said to be native, but I don't think any wild populations have ever been found. This is Ficrea McDougalii. We found some kind of right outside settlements, but they were very clearly planted. We were never able to find actual habitat plants. There's another Dioon, maybe Tomaselli. And this is just kind of in the main historic part of the city. This is like our last night there. This entire strip is just very lively, full of people. There's people selling arts and goods and little carvings called alebrijes, and art galleries open. It's just a very lively city. And I would walk around this city for hours at night, just as a tourist, completely, my phone on me, everything, and it is just the most calm, like relaxed place. Like I don't know, I was like calling all my friends and telling them like, man, I'm just walking around the city at nighttime, I'm carefree, like as somebody who lives in Oakland, like I felt safer here than I did at home, and it's just really a great place. If you ever have the chance to go, it's just the fun. Like I would go back just to go to the city of Oaxaca alone and spend time. so many great museums, nice people. The food, of course, is amazing. Here's a plate of mole that I had on the last day with the black and the red, and the drink behind it is called pulque. It's derived from it's like fermented agave sap. Very traditional drink. I can't say I liked it really, but it was part of the experience. But the food is amazing. The people are amazing. This is kind of the last morning. This is the same street, and you can see people are kind of slow to wake up. And yeah, if you get the chance to ever go to Oaxaca, please take the opportunity. It's not too hard to get to. Decent accommodations for Americans. It's relatively cheap. I mean, each hotel, the most I spent was like maybe $40 a night or something. Your average meal is maybe $5 or $6, and really just great, healthy food. And so that's the end of my trip. And
What an amazing
yeah.
trip. Thank you, Troy, for sharing. That's what a great
Yeah.
area.
Yeah.
The city looks so clean.
Yeah, there were people who you'd see them walking around just like with these like brooms and dustbins, and like they're constantly picking up trash and stuff. But like, yeah, I mean, I don't think people are really like it. Littering doesn't really seem to be much of a thing.
Well,
It's
that's good.
very clean, and there's like little dogs running around, and the dogs are all nice, and they come up to you and stuff. And yeah, but really a great place.
Wonderful. Thank you for sharing. Is anybody have any questions for Troy?
I do. I think when I was in Oaxaca, this is many, many years ago. Um, I guess it was a little park that was surrounded by gardenias in the ground, and I was so impressed. Did you see that?
There were the few places where, I mean, just large shrub gardenias, and I mean, the smell was just like overwhelming. I mean, you'd
Yeah,
be hundreds of feet
yeah,
away and just covered in those little white flowers. And yeah, so
yeah.
there's definitely gardenias all
Beautiful,
over the place. And yeah,
beautiful.
just like the plantings in the hotels are very cool. There's all types of like uh, big hibiscus and things, very tropical looking. Yeah, a lot of
Mhm.
very fragrant plants, definitely.
Nice.
The
Nice.
botanical garden, they must have changed because when I was there, you could just walk in and nobody was around, and
Okay.
that is,
You had to it's like get in there at a specific time slot, and you're in this group, and you specify whether you're the English speaking or non-English speaking,
Oh,
wow.
and you have to stay in the group, and yeah, it's like this whole big thing. But still very worth visiting. They have some really incredible old specimen trees and other succulents and things like that, and it's really just visually a beautiful garden, definitely.
Are you on Facebook at all?
No, I'm not on Facebook. I've been like over the past couple years, like mulling whether or not to get back on Facebook just for plant pages and things like that, because it does seem like a great resource. But
mhm.
I use Instagram for the most part. I have like posts on Instagram where you can see stuff, but I've been considering coming back to Facebook. We'll see. Thank you guys.
Okay.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Troy.
Okay, so if anybody wants to host a coffee in the garden, we're looking for filling up the roster. Go visit some gardens. They don't have to be perfect. We're all gardeners, so we all know that garden is never perfect. It's always evolving and
Good.
changing. And Troy, that includes you. Next month is Kip McMichaels, who's actually offered a field trip as well. We haven't set that timing up. Most of the calicortis are a little later. So he has an amazing garden with that he actually grows calicortis in his garden and from seed. And so we'll probably be talking about calicortis in all aspects as far as in nature as well as in your own garden. So that'll be next month. Anybody else have any other announcements? Ruth Bancroft's garden, they cut down on the east side of the garden, all the oleander, because they're going to maintain it a little lower, but there you can see all her driveway with her iris collection. So you may want to think about a trip up there in April when they're blooming.
I might mention something that the Western Hort is going to be having an interesting meeting in April. We're going to go ahead and show Piet Oudorff's film for the 5 seasons, The Gardens of Piet Oudorff. And we're going to be having some vendors actually at our meeting too. So they'll be selling plants, and that gentleman that does the ironwork has agreed to come to our meeting too. So that's going to be in April, the second Wednesday in April. So you might want to put that on your calendar.
Terrific. Okie doke. Thanks so much. So if anybody has any ideas for field trips or want to help with that, we've got all our speakers for this year, so we're really excited about that. I want to encourage everybody to participate in the plant forum. And so until next month, thanks so much. Thanks, Troy. We'll see everybody.